The scissors, the silence, and the secret. It was a rainy Monday morning when little Ella Reeves walked into her new school with a nervous smile and a messy ponytail. Her shoes squeaked on the polished hallway floor as she clutched her drawing book to her chest. She was only 9 years old, small for her age, and still adjusting to life without her mother. It had been just 6 months since the accident. Since then, her world had changed completely. Her father, Keanu Reeves, had quietly taken her out of the spotlight and enrolled her in a regular public school, hoping to give her some sense of normal childhood. Ella's first few weeks had gone by mostly unnoticed. She was quiet, polite, and never talked about who her father was. She didn't wear designer clothes or flashy accessories. She wore simple dresses, often the same ones, and always had her hair tied in a loose ponytail with the same faded blue ribbon. It was her mother's ribbon, and Ella never let anyone touch it, but not everyone understood that, especially not Miss Connie Darrow, the strict third-grade teacher with a reputation for control and order. Miss Darrow believed in appearance, uniformity, and discipline. She disliked late homework, untied shoelaces, and messy hair. She ran her classroom like a clock. And in her eyes, Ella was always a few ticks behind. It all happened on a Tuesday. The day began like any other. The bell rang, students lined up, and Miss Darrow greeted them with her usual curt nods. But by mid-morning, tension began to brew. Ella's ribbon had come loose during recess, and her hair, now a little tangled, fell across her face. She brushed it away gently, too afraid to retie it. It was old and fragile. Her mother had once worn it on their last trip to the beach. She remembered the salt in the air, the way her mother laughed, and how the ribbon fluttered like a flag. Miss Darrow noticed. She narrowed her eyes, tapping her clipboard with her red pen. She called Ella to the front of the class. "Stand still," the teacher said sharply, pulling open her drawer. Ella hesitated, her heart pounding. She took a small step back. "Your hair is a mess. We need to fix this." "It's a distraction," Miss Darrow said as she pulled out a pair of scissors. Ella shook her head slowly, tears filling her eyes. "Please, no. It's my mom's ribbon." But the teacher didn't listen. "This is a classroom, not a salon," she muttered, and in one quick, unthinking motion she snipped the ribbon loose. A few strands of Ella's hair went with it, falling softly to the floor like broken feathers. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ella didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply picked up the ribbon from the floor, held it to her chest, and walked back to her desk. The class was stunned. No one spoke. Some of the kids looked down, unsure how to react. Others looked at Miss Darrow with quiet disbelief. By lunchtime, the story had already spread across the school. Some students whispered that the teacher had made a girl cry. Others said she had cut her hair for no reason. One girl had taken a photo of the moment just after the cut, showing Ella's wide, stunned eyes. But it wasn't until 2:45 p.m. that everything truly began to unravel. Keanu Reeves was already waiting in his car when the dismissal bell rang. He often came early, parked quietly near the back entrance, and waved as Ella walked out. But this time she didn't wave. She didn't even look up. She walked slowly, eyes to the ground, clutching something in her fist. Keanu's heart skipped. Something was wrong. He stepped out of the car and met her halfway. "Hey, sunshine," he said softly, kneeling to her height. "You okay?" Ella didn't answer at first. Instead, she opened her hand and showed him the ribbon. It was frayed, uneven, and in her other hand, she held a small piece of her hair. "She cut it, Daddy," Ella whispered. Keanu froze. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The world seemed to narrow to just the sight of that ribbon and his daughter's trembling lips. He wasn't angry, not in the way most people imagine rage. His was a quiet storm. His jaw tensed. His eyes darkened with something deeper than fury. It was the pain of seeing his daughter's trust broken, her memories disrespected. He took the ribbon gently and wrapped it around her hand. "Get in the car," he said. "I'll be right back." Ella hesitated. "Are you mad?" "No," Keanu said softly, "but someone needs to understand what that ribbon meant." He walked back toward the school with a calmness that sent chills through every teacher watching from the window. Word had already spread that the man picking up Ella was Keanu Reeves, but no one expected he would return, and certainly not walk through the front office with the silent, slow intensity of a father whose child had been hurt. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked to speak with the principal. Inside the office, Miss Darrow sat, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than apologetic. "It was just a ribbon," she said. Keanu looked at her, and something in his expression made her shift in her seat. "It wasn't just a ribbon," he said, voice low. "It was a memory, a piece of her mother she still carries with her. You didn't cut hair, you cut into her heart." "I was only enforcing school standards," Miss Darrow replied, defensive. "We can't allow emotional attachments to override appearance expectations." Keanu stood silent for a beat, then turned to the principal. "I've worked on sets around the most difficult directors in places where everything has to be perfect. But there's a line, and that line is respect. If you can't respect a child's grief, her quiet ways of remembering someone she's lost, then maybe you shouldn't be teaching children." The room fell silent, but before anything more could be said, the door burst open. It was a student, a brave boy named Simon, who had overheard the whole conversation and recorded it on his phone. He stepped in and said, "Mr. Reeves, people need to know. We saw everything, and we're with Ella." Keanu looked at him, stunned. "Thank you," he said, then looked back at the adults. "You see, kids get it, maybe more than we do." Outside, more students had gathered. Somehow news had spread fast. They weren't shouting. They weren't protesting. They were just standing there quietly in solidarity, holding blue ribbons they had found or made from paper. A simple message. They were with Ella. Miss Darrow looked out the window and finally began to understand the weight of what she had done. Her authority had been unquestioned for years. But now, a little girl's silent dignity and a father's quiet strength had cracked that armor wide open. But this wasn't over yet, because later that evening, a video of the incident, recorded by one of the students, started gaining traction online. Not because Keanu Reeves was involved, not at first, but because of the way he spoke, the way he stood up, not just for his daughter, but for every child carrying silent pain. The story had struck a nerve, and just as it reached 1 million views, someone knocked on Keanu's door that night. It wasn't the school. It wasn't the press. It was someone else. Someone from his past. And what they revealed next would change everything. A letter from the shadows and a voice from the past. Keanu Reeves stood still in the hallway of his quiet home, staring at the door as the knocking echoed once more. Outside, the world was shifting. Videos were spreading, comments were flooding in, and a simple moment between a father and daughter was turning into a symbol of something much bigger. But none of that prepared him for the unexpected weight of the knock. It wasn't urgent, not aggressive, but deliberate, as if the person on the other side carried a message that couldn't wait. He opened the door slowly. Standing there was a woman in her late 40s wearing a navy blue coat, her face pale, eyes tired, and her hands holding a single envelope. She looked up at him with a strange mix of fear and recognition. For a few seconds, there was silence between them. Then she took a small breath and spoke. "You probably don't remember me," she said quietly, "but I remember you. I was her teacher, your wife's." Keanu's heart skipped. For a moment, it felt like the air around him tightened. Memories he hadn't touched in years stirred like dust in a forgotten room. She continued before he could speak. "I taught her in high school. Her name was Melissa Young back then, before she became Melissa Reeves. I didn't come here to talk about her death. I came here because she left something behind. Something I never got to give you." Keanu stepped aside, still too stunned to find the right words. She walked into the living room carefully, as if crossing sacred ground. Her eyes went to the photos on the wall. Ella's drawings, the framed moments of a father and daughter trying to rebuild their world. She sat on the edge of the sofa, the envelope now trembling in her hands. "After the accident, I wrote to you," she said. "But the letter came back unopened. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe you weren't ready, But now, after what happened with your daughter, I knew I had to try again. She handed him the envelope. Keanu took it gently and sat across from her. The paper was old, the seal yellowed, the name Keanu written in soft cursive. He opened it with care, unfolding the letter inside, and as he began to read, the world around him seemed to blur. My dearest Keanu, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry for leaving you this way. There's so much I wish I could have said, so much I hoped we'd still do. But there's one thing I need you to know more than anything. Protect her ribbon. I know it sounds silly, but that ribbon, it's more than fabric. It's the last memory of the day I felt most alive. That beach, that laugh, that wind in my hair. She'll hold on to it when she misses me. She'll use it as armor when the world feels too heavy. Please don't let anyone take that from her, please. And when she's old enough, tell her why it matters. Tell her who her mother was. Not the famous actor's wife, not the girl in the headlines, but the woman who danced barefoot on the sand with her daughter in one arm and her husband smiling behind the camera. Always yours, Melissa. The letter shook in Keanu's hands as he finished reading. Tears welled in his eyes, not because of the words themselves, but because they echoed everything he had tried to protect. His daughter's pain, her quiet strength, her connection to something she couldn't explain. It all made sense now. Melissa had known. She had left a map, and he had followed it without realizing. The woman across from him, Melissa's old teacher, cleared her throat. I kept that letter for years. I was afraid it would get lost or forgotten. I couldn't let that happen. Not after seeing how much she loved you. Keanu nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for holding on to this. She rose to leave but paused at the door. You know, when Melissa was a teenager, she once said something I'll never forget. She told me, I hope I find someone who listens more than he talks. Someone who sees things others miss. She found that in you. And now, your daughter has it too. After she left, Keanu sat in the dim light of the living room, holding the letter like a sacred relic. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock on the wall. He looked over to the hallway, where he could hear Ella humming faintly as she played in her room. He rose slowly and walked toward her. He knocked, gently before opening the door. Ella was on the floor, coloring in her notebook. The ribbon was now tied carefully around a little plush rabbit's ear. She looked up, her eyes brighter than they had been that morning. Hi, Daddy, she said. He knelt beside her and touched her cheek. Do you know what this ribbon really is? Ella paused. Mom's? He smiled softly. Yes, but more than that, it's her heart, her joy, her strength, and you're carrying it beautifully. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, the world was still moving fast. The internet was buzzing. Calls were coming in. But none of it mattered right now. In this room, between a father and his daughter, there was only stillness, memory, and love. The next morning, Keanu received a message from the school board. They had seen the video, and they weren't happy about it, but not in the way he expected. In fact, what they wanted was going to make things even more complicated, because Miss Darrow was not only under review, she was now refusing to apologize, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. Worse, she had lawyered up, and the story was getting picked up by major outlets. What started as a quiet stand by a father was becoming a national debate on classroom authority, grief, and emotional sensitivity. But there was something else. The superintendent asked Keanu to meet privately. You may want to sit down for this, the voice on the phone had said, and when Keanu walked into that office later that day, what he found on the superintendent's desk would unravel a secret about Miss Darrow's past. A secret that involved more than just rules. A secret that would tie her to his family. In a way no one could have expected. The buried truth beneath the teacher's desk, KeanuReeves walked through the polished halls of the district education office with steady, deliberate steps. The building was quiet, professional, and filled with the sterile silence of bureaucracy, but inside his chest questions thundered. His meeting with the superintendent had been requested urgently. There were no details given over the phone, only a calm but unsettling message. This isn't just about your daughter anymore. Something deeper has come up, and it involves Miss Darrow. When he entered the large office at the end of the corridor, the superintendent, Mr. Leon Castillo, stood from his desk, extending a hand with a grave look. He was a tall man in his 60s, the kind who spoke with measured words and carried the weight of decades in public education. He gestured for Keanu to sit, then closed the door behind them. "Thank you for coming," Mr. Castillo said. "I know you've been dealing with a lot, and I wish this was a simpler conversation, but we've been going through Miss Darrow's personnel file, and something came up, something we didn't expect." He pulled out a slim manila folder, slid it across the desk, and opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a printed document, an old evaluation, and what looked like a faded disciplinary record from over 15 years ago. Keanu leaned forward, scanning the contents quickly. It was a report from a previous school in another state, detailing a troubling incident involving Miss Darrow and a student named Elizabeth Young. Keanu froze, his throat tightened. "Elizabeth Young," he repeated aloud. That was Melissa's sister." Mr. Castillo nodded solemnly. "We confirmed it. It was your late wife's younger sister. Apparently back then Miss Darrow was a first-year teacher at a small school in Nevada. She was assigned to Elizabeth's class. There was a conflict. It escalated. Elizabeth accused her of humiliating her in front of the class, of punishing her for wearing a family heirloom necklace every day, a necklace that belonged to her mother. When she refused to remove it, Miss Darrow allegedly cut it off during art class with scissors." Keanu's hands curled into fists. It was like déjà vu. The scissors, the personal item, the cold dismissal of grief. "What happened after that?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but brittle. "Elizabeth was withdrawn from school shortly after. The family tried to file a complaint, but the school administration at the time suppressed it, citing lack of evidence and emotional overreaction. Miss Darrow received a verbal warning, was quietly transferred, and the matter disappeared into the system. But now that Ella's situation mirrors it almost exactly, we can't ignore the pattern." Keanu leaned back in his chair, feeling a cold wave wash over him. This wasn't just negligence. This was history repeating itself, history rooted in a strange, targeted pattern of cruelty toward young girls who were simply trying to hold on to something personal, something sacred. "Did Melissa know?" he asked suddenly. "We don't know. We found no public connection between her and this event, but if she did know, she never spoke up." Keanu's mind raced. Could it be possible that Miss Darrow had known all along who Ella was? Could she have connected the name, Reeves, to Melissa, to Elizabeth, to the past? Was her act not just about school rules, but something deeper, something more vindictive or unresolved? He rose from his chair. "I need to speak with her," he said. "We're launching a formal investigation," Mr. Castillo replied. "And as a parent, you have every right to participate. But please understand, things might escalate legally. The media is already circling." Keanu left the office, but he didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, he drove across town to an address he hadn't visited in years, a small, quiet care home tucked near the edge of a wooded park. It was where Elizabeth had lived for the past decade. After her breakdown during college, she had been diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress and complex grief disorder. Melissa had always blamed herself for not protecting her younger sister more. And after Melissa died, Keanu had continued to support Elizabeth's care, quietly with no fanfare. He walked through the facility with quiet purpose. The staff greeted him warmly. They knew who he was, not the actor, but the man who visited every December with gifts and gentle conversation. Elizabeth was in the garden, seated near a small pond, sketching cranes on a piece of paper. "Liz," Keanu said gently. She turned. Her eyes lit up and a slow smile appeared. "You came." He nodded and sat beside her on the bench. "Ella's teacher did something. he said softly. Something you'll understand better than anyone. He told her everything, about the ribbon, the scissors, the silence in the room, and the superintendent's file. He watched as her hands trembled, the pencil slipping from her grasp. Her name, she whispered. It was her. Keanu nodded. Do you remember more about what happened? Elizabeth's voice shook as she spoke. I remember she didn't. Like that I wore Mom's necklace. Said it was distracting. I told her it helped me concentrate, made me feel safe. One day I forgot to tuck it in my shirt and she snapped. She dragged me to the front and cut it off right in front of everyone. The chain broke, it fell into the paint tray, and she didn't even say sorry. A tear rolled down her cheek. Melissa held me all night. She wanted to fight, but Dad said it would only make things worse. Keanu reached over, took her hand, and squeezed it. It's not too late. Do you think she knew? Elizabeth asked. About Ella? I think she did, he answered. And I think this time, she went too far. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden shadows over the pond, Keanu realized something profound. This wasn't just about defending his daughter. It was about healing something older, deeper, and far more painful. Miss Darrow hadn't just wronged a child. She had been a quiet storm in the lives of vulnerable girls for years, and she had walked away each time without consequence. But not this time. That night, Keanu sat at his desk, writing carefully. It was not a letter of revenge or rage. It was a testimony, a statement of truth. He included Melissa's letter, Elizabeth's account, and the details from the superintendent's file. And before sealing it, he added a final sentence. This isn't about punishment. It's about protection. He sent the letter to the school board, the district, and, after long consideration, to the media outlet that had first aired the video. Not for fame, not for attention, but for accountability. But as the sun rose the next morning, bringing with it an avalanche of news coverage and growing outrage, something else arrived. An anonymous letter. It had no return address. But the handwriting was familiar, and the contents would shake Keanu to his core, because it revealed one final connection, one that not even Melissa had known, one that could tear open everything they thought they understood about Miss Darrow and why she had done what she did. The letter with no name and the confession no one saw coming. The morning air was heavy with anticipation as the world outside Keanu Reeves's home buzzed with energy he didn't ask for. News trucks had started. Parking across the street, reporters staked out sidewalks and neighbors whispered behind curtains. Ever since the video of the school confrontation went viral, the story had grown into something more than a personal dispute. It had become a national conversation about emotional intelligence, childhood trauma, and how the smallest acts of cruelty could echo across generations. But as Keanu stood by his kitchen counter with the anonymous envelope in his hand, none of that mattered in that moment. This letter, unlike the others, had no name, no return address, just a single word on the front: truth. He opened it slowly, the paper stiff and clean as if the sender had deliberated every fold. Inside was a typed message, void of emotion but filled with revelation. You do not know the whole story. The woman you know as Connie Darrow was once Connie Dalton. She changed her name 23 years ago after a public breakdown during her final teaching practicum. She was accused of emotional misconduct, found unfit to teach children under supervision, and removed from her university placement. The board never officially banned her from education because her family intervened. Her father was a school district judge in Utah. Records were buried. She vanished from the system for 7 years. Then she re-emerged in Nevada. Same profession, new name, same patterns. Check the teaching license archives in Utah, and you'll find the truth. She was never supposed to be in a classroom again. Keanu read the letter 3 times, his fingers tightening with each pass. The implications were devastating. Miss Darrow wasn't just a misguided educator with a rigid sense of order. She was someone who had already been removed from the system, once only to return under a new identity, continuing a cycle of emotional harm against vulnerable children. The chain of events no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like something darker. A pattern fueled by unchecked privilege, hidden identities, and a system too broken to connect the pieces. He immediately made calls, one to a private investigator he trusted, another to the superintendent's office. Within hours, the investigator confirmed the records. In a dusty university archive in Salt Lake City, they found the original name, Connie Dalton. The report matched the anonymous letter. A documented case of psychological manipulation against a student during her internship, accusations of isolation, forced silence, and emotional humiliation. Her removal had been swift, but her family's connections had ensured her future remained open. When she returned as Connie Darrow, she started again with no red flags on. Her file. Keanu sat back, absorbing it all. It explained the coldness in her actions, the deliberate cruelty, her calculated removal of objects tied to emotional memory, but it also meant something else. She had intentionally hidden her past, and she had been targeting students like Ella and Elizabeth not by accident, but perhaps by design. Something inside her resented grief, or weakness, or maybe children, who dared to carry love in fragile things. But if Keanu was going to act on this, he needed to be careful. Exposing her history without hard evidence could backfire. Lawsuits were already being whispered about. Defamation. Emotional distress. The press would be watching every move now. He had to find a way to bring light to the truth without burning everyone involved, especially the children. That evening, he met with Superintendent Castillo again, this time with documents in hand. They sat in a quiet conference room away from cameras and board members. Keanu laid out the anonymous letter, the university file printout, and the investigators. Report. Castillo read each page carefully. When he looked up, there was a heavy sadness in his expression. "We've failed," he said. "Not just your daughter, not just your family, but every student who passed through her classroom." Keanu didn't speak. He knew there was no comfort in those words. Just truth. "I'll bring this to the emergency board session," Castillo continued. "We'll vote to suspend her license pending a full investigation, but I have to warn you, she won't go down quietly." And she didn't. That same night, a news story aired on local television. Miss Darrow, now visibly defensive and composed, sat down with a private news channel to give her version of events. She painted herself as the victim. A loyal educator with decades of experience being harassed and harangued by overzealous parents and an unforgiving social media culture. She denied ever knowing Melissa or Elizabeth. She claimed the cutting of the ribbon was a harmless enforcement of school policy. And then she looked into the camera and said, "I have devoted my life to discipline and I will not apologize for setting high standards. If we start letting children use emotion to excuse disorder, we lose the classroom." The clip spread quickly, and so did the backlash. Thousands of viewers flooded the comments with disbelief. Survivors of emotional abuse, former students, and even teachers who once worked with her came forward, sharing their own stories. One teacher anonymously emailed Keanu saying, she once ripped a poetry journal out of a student's hands because it sounded too sad. The boy never came back after winter break. But amidst the storm, there was something unexpected. Ella. While the adults argued, while the school board filed motions and the press spun headlines, Ella asked her father a simple question. "Can I speak at the school?" Keanu hesitated. "Speak about what?" "About Mom, and about the ribbon. I want them to know why it mattered." He looked at her, this small girl with quiet eyes and a heart too big for her age, and realized something powerful. She didn't want revenge. She didn't care about lawsuits or disciplinary hearings. She just wanted to be heard, to make sure no other child felt the way she had in that classroom. Silenced, dismissed, erased. So the next week, at a special school assembly held to discuss values, grief, and personal expression, Ella stood before her classmates, teachers, and parents. She wore a simple white dress, the blue ribbon tied carefully around her wrist. Her voice was soft but clear. "My name is Ella. My mom died last year, and when she did, I didn't know how to keep her with me. I don't remember her voice clearly anymore, or her smell. But I remember the ribbon she wore on the day we were all happy. It was a beach day, and every time I wear this ribbon, I remember how she laughed and spun me around. I don't wear it to be different. I wear it so I don't forget. So please, don't take our memories. Sometimes they're all we have. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the strictest teachers looked away, blinking back tears. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about Miss Darrow anymore. It was about empathy, about listening, about how children carry grief, and how adults must protect the delicate ways they express it. But just as the room began to exhale, just as Keanu thought the battle was finally nearing a close, his phone buzzed with a call. It was his investigator. "You need to hear this," the voice said. "We found something buried in an old district record. It's not just about Connie's past. It's about her connection to someone else, someone in your life, who's still around, someone who may have helped her stay hidden all these years." Keanu stood frozen in the back of the school auditorium, the applause for his daughter still ringing through the air. Because what came next wasn't just going to affect his daughter. It was going to change everything he thought he knew about trust. Betrayal beneath the badge and the face behind the curtain, Keanu Reeves stepped out into the cold air, the last of the applause for Ella still echoing inside the school auditorium as his hand gripped the phone tighter. The investigator's voice on the other end was firm but uneasy, like a man who had uncovered something that wasn't supposed to be seen. Keanu leaned against the stone wall near the school's front steps and listened as the voice continued. "We traced the change of identity. It was clean, too clean. Someone inside the Educational Records Office signed off on a sealed transition from Dalton to Darrow. The official who handled it was never investigated. The signature matches a man named Robert Lansing." Keanu narrowed his eyes, confused. "I don't know him." "Yes," the investigator said slowly. "You do. He's your daughter's school counselor." The words hit him like a stone to the chest. Mr. Lansing, the mild-mannered, soft-spoken counselor who'd been assigned to Ella since her first day. The man who always wore warm sweaters and offered juice boxes during parent meetings. He had checked in on Ella when she was quiet, sent gentle notes home, reassured Keanu that grief takes time and that some kids heal best with privacy. He had seemed harmless, even kind. But now, he was the missing link in a chain of deception that spanned decades. "I don't understand," Keanu said. "What would he gain?" "That's what we're working on," the investigator replied. "But here's what we know. Robert Lansing worked in Utah Public Records in the early 2000s. During the time Connie's identity was changed, 6 months after she was cleared, he moved out of state and reappeared in California. They've worked together before. 2 other schools on the same timelines, same transfers, same cities." Keanu lowered the phone and stared at the horizon. Clouds gathered above like shadows pressing down, and everything inside him twisted with one painful question. How long had this gone on? How many children? How many broken ribbons, torn journals, and voices silenced under the guise of discipline? He couldn't let it continue. That night he returned home in silence. The house was warm, filled with the soft hum of music and the scent of pasta Ella had helped cook. She met him at the door, hugging him tightly, and whispered, "Did you hear everyone clapping?" He kissed the top of her head and nodded. "You made them feel something important, sweetheart." But while she slept, curled in her favorite blanket with the ribbon tied around her wrist, Keanu sat at his desk and wrote out every piece of evidence he now had. Melissa's letter, the file on Connie Dalton, the video of Ella's speech, and now the report on Robert Lansing. He copied everything onto a secure flash drive. He printed backups. He documented timelines, quotes, matching employment dates, even scanned photographs from archived school newsletters. He was no longer just a father seeking justice. He was building a case, one that could expose not just a bad teacher, but a hidden network of complicity. The next day, he walked into the district office without calling ahead. The receptionist, startled, stammered, "Mr. Reeves, you don't have an appointment." "I'm not here for one," he said calmly. "I'm here to submit a report, and I want the superintendent and legal counsel present when I do." Within minutes, Superintendent Castillo arrived, along with the district attorney's liaison. Keanu presented his folder, flash drive, and full explanation. The room was silent as they reviewed the data, brows furrowed, eyes wide with disbelief. When they reached the part about Robert Lansing, Castillo stood up slowly and said, "This goes deeper than school policy. This may cross into federal jurisdiction," and it did. Within 72 hours, a formal inquiry was opened into the licensing history of Connie Darrow and the employment path of Robert Lansing. The Department of Education escalated the matter. By the end of the week, Lansing was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The school board scheduled an emergency hearing, and the media, already ravenous, caught wind of the deeper conspiracy. But in the middle of the chaos, something unexpected happened. Connie Darrow vanished. She stopped answering calls. She didn't attend the hearing. Her house went dark, mailbox overflowing, phone disconnected. At first, many thought she was hiding out, buying time, lawyer shopping, avoiding the blowback. But on the third night, a letter arrived at Keanu's home, handwritten. No envelope. Slipped under the door. He opened it and recognized the tight, precise script immediately. "You were never supposed to find out. Not about Elizabeth. Not about the name. I thought I could control the story again like I always have. But your daughter, she did what no one else could. She made people feel, and now it's all crashing down. But before the fire spreads, you need to understand. This didn't start with me, it started with him, with Lansing. I was broken when I met him. I'd lost my career. My father had died. I was angry. And he offered me a way back in. A clean slate. A chance to prove the system wrong. He told me the only way to fix pain was to erase it from others. He fed the lies, rewrote my files, protected me when things got close. He told me emotion was weakness, and I believed him. I buried what I did to Elizabeth. I told myself she was fragile, that it wasn't my fault. But your daughter, Ella, she wasn't fragile. She was strong. She looked at me with her mother's eyes. And suddenly, I remembered everything I tried to forget. I was never supposed to teach again, but I did. And I hurt people. This is my fault. I'll face whatever comes next. But know this. He's still hiding more. He always is. No signature. Just the single letter C at the bottom. Keanu sat there in the dim light of his study, holding the confession and feeling the weight of every life this story had touched. Connie Darrow wasn't a villain born from malice. She was made by silence, by protection, by a system that rewarded those who manipulated it. But Robert Lansing, he had been the architect, the one who built the mask, the one who watched every act and walked away untouched. And now the world was watching. But even as Keanu prepared to take the next step, even as the school board's final hearing approached, he didn't know one more truth was still buried, one that would shake the foundation of everything. Because someone else was about to speak, someone from Robert Lansing's past, a former student, a grown man, who had waited 20 years for someone else to say what he never could. And when he stepped forward, he didn't just bring his story, he brought evidence. The final voice and the reckoning that echoed beyond the classroom. The sun barely broke through the clouds the morning of the final school board hearing. Cameras lined the streets outside the district office. Reporters adjusted their microphones. Students and parents gathered in silence, and officials filed in one by one under the weight of a story that had grown too large for the walls that tried to contain it. Inside the boardroom, tension thickened with every passing second. It wasn't just about Connie Darrow anymore. It wasn't just about a ribbon or a scissor or a name that changed. This had become something larger, a test of accountability, of truth, of whether wounds carried by children would finally be acknowledged in a system built to ignore them. Keanu Reeves sat near the front row, his hand gently resting on Ella's shoulder. She sat still, her ribbon tied neatly around her wrist, watching the room with calm, curious eyes that had already seen more than many would in a lifetime. To her right sat Elizabeth, Melissa's sister, her fingers trembling slightly, but her gaze steady as the echoes of her past prepared to meet the present. Everyone waited. Then the doors opened. A tall man in his 30s stepped forward. He was unshaven, wore a worn jacket, and walked with the careful posture of someone who had been hurt before. He didn't look around. He went straight to the microphone. The room didn't recognize him, but Keanu did. It was the man who had sent the message to the school board. The man who once sat in the back of a classroom as a child, carrying a story, buried in silence. He cleared his throat. "My name is Benjamin Crawford. I was a student at Elmsworth Elementary. I'm not here to speak as a witness to what happened to Ella Reeves. I'm here to speak as a survivor of what Robert Lansing did to me when I was 8 years old." The room froze. Some board members leaned forward. Others whispered into their assistants' ears. The district's legal team exchanged glances, but Benjamin didn't flinch. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black recorder. "This," he said, "is a recording of a counseling session I had with Mr. Lansing when I was a child. I didn't know it was recording. I had hidden it in my backpack after my mom told me to document what was said when she became suspicious. This recording has been verified, authenticated, and transcribed by 2 forensic audio labs. And today, I'm submitting it to the board, the media, and the Attorney General's office." He pressed play. The speaker crackled. Then came the voice. Calm, calculating, familiar. "Feelings are lies, Ben. You say you miss your dad, but he's gone. Clinging to sadness won't bring him back. Now take that drawing and throw it away. You don't need it. We'll start again. No tears this time. Tears don't belong in classrooms." The voice that followed was small, young, trembling. But he gave me that. He drew it for me. "Ben, do not disobey me again. We fix broken boys here, not feed their fantasies." The audio cut off. The room was silent, not a breath, not a whisper. Benjamin looked up. "He told me that every week, for a year. He destroyed letters my dad wrote me from overseas. He shredded a birthday card in front of me. He told me if I cried, I'd be sent to the sad room. I never told anyone after that. My mom tried. She got shut down. We moved. I grew up broken. For years I thought maybe it was me. Maybe I was weak. But then I saw the story about Ella, the ribbon, and I knew he hadn't changed." He turned to Keanu. "Your daughter saved me," he said, voice cracking. "She gave a voice to the boy I used to be." Tears filled Keanu's eyes, not just for Benjamin, but for every child who had once stared at scissors, or letters, or silence, and been told their grief was inappropriate. The board took a recess. When they returned, they didn't hesitate. A unanimous vote. Connie Darrow's teaching credentials were permanently revoked. She was officially reported to the state board and flagged for identity fraud. An open case was launched to investigate all previous schools she had worked in. Robert Lansing was placed under federal investigation for records tampering, emotional abuse, and unlawful concealment of employment history. He was arrested later that week without incident. Neighbors said he didn't say a word as they placed him in the car. The media erupted, but through it all, Keanu stayed quiet. He turned down interviews. He declined documentaries. He kept his focus where it had always been, on his daughter. Weeks passed, then months. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and louder distractions. But, in the quiet corners of classrooms across the country, something had changed. Schools began revising their grief and trauma policies. Counselors were retrained. Teachers were encouraged to listen rather than correct. And most importantly, children were taught that memories are not distractions, they are roots. Ella Reeves finished her school year surrounded by friends who now knew what strength looked like, not in popularity, not in perfection, but in kindness, that refused to disappear, even when challenged. One spring afternoon, as Keanu picked her up from school, She handed him a drawing. It showed 3 figures: a girl holding a ribbon, a woman standing behind her smiling, and a man beside them holding their hands. "It's us," she said softly. He looked at her, then at the drawing. "And her," she added, pointing at the woman in the back. "I drew her how I remember her." Keanu swallowed hard, pulling her close. "It's perfect," he whispered, and as they walked home, hand in hand, he realized something deeper than justice had happened. His daughter hadn't just survived a broken system. She had changed it, one ribbon at a time,